Great. I'm very excited to be a part of this conference today and very passionate about what I'll be speaking to you about. I am currently living in Colorado, love the outdoors, love spending time with my family, love what I do at my work, and I'm very passionate about Emergenetics, not only from a professional standpoint, but what impact it's had on me personally in building connections within my family and so forth. So very passionate about this. I'm also very proud to be a part of Western Union. Western Union is a company that I've been with for over 25 years, which is sort of an anomaly in today's world. Western Union's been around itself for over 160 years, and what you're seeing on the screen is some pictures of young boys that are delivering telegrams, which is what many people relate to when they hear Western Union. We no longer deliver telegrams, but it is a huge part of our history. Just an interesting fact, back in 1867, one of our great employees, Thomas Edison, invented the stock ticker while he was employed with Western Union. So again, there's a real rich history, and it really ties in with my history and my career. One word that is really important to Western Union is the word connecting, and that's also an important word for those of us in the Emergenetics community. So at Western Union, we are literally in the business of connecting families and friends and helping them to move money around the world and to make their lives better. This core idea of connecting is very consistent with my purpose to help salespeople better connect with their clients. And that's what I'll be speaking about today. What I'd like to first present is one of the objectives that I've had in my sales training is to impact bottom line sales by increasing client connection, or in other words, helping the salespeople to improve their ability to connect on a deeper level with clients. And I have used Emergenetics as a way to be able to do that. And specifically, I want to share two critical ways that I have used Emergenetics to meet this objective, and this will be the basis of the presentation today. First, to fit Emergenetics into the consultative selling model that I use, and I'll spend quite a bit of time talking about that. The second way to meet that objective is utilizing Emergenetics to engage the sales team. So as many of you know, salespeople are different animals. We're antsy. Some of us are ADD. Spending time in the classroom is probably the last thing that a salesperson wants to do. So I've used Emergenetics, this tool, to be able to engage all of these different personalities. And toward the end of the presentation, I'll speak about that. But first, I'd like to go into fitting Emergenetics into the training model that I use. Consultative selling is the foundation for our sales methodology at Western Union. And I think a lot of times we still have this misconception of successful salespeople. We think they're people that are good at talking, people that are good at convincing other people to buy something. The reality or the data really shows that this is not true. The highest performing consultative salespeople are those that focus on the customer. They're genuine. They persuade the client through involvement, and they really earn the right to advance by building trust with the client. What you're looking at on the screen are 5 basic skills that I teach in my sales training at Western Union. One of those skills that I've mentioned before are really critical, and it's the skill of being able to connect with the client. For Western Union, for our U.S. sales team, what that means is that the salespeople need to be really good at being able to quickly assess what part of the brain they are speaking to, because they realize that they have a very short time period to get that connection in order to have an engaged discussion with a client. And secondly, to be able to build the trust with that client throughout the entire process, and doing that by speaking the language in a respectful way of the client. Sometimes when I teach Emergenetics, inevitably somebody in the sales team will will raise their hand and say, Jerry, this feels like you're trying to get us to be somebody else that we're not, sort of disingenuous, maybe even manipulative. And every time I hear something like that, I'll pull back out of my experience in the sales team. I used to be a sales director down in Texas, and I had several people that reported to me, and we would make sales calls on a lot of different clients, and many of them were Hispanic, and I'm as typically American as you can get. I know very little Spanish, but I learned real quickly that if I used just a couple of words of Spanish and said, hola, ¿cómo estás? And I don't even say that right, but I would look into the eyes of the client, and I realized that I earned just a little bit of trust to be able to continue on and have that discussion. Well, using the tool of Emergenetics in selling is really no different than that. Emergenetics expands the languages that a salesperson can use, and therefore expands the number of people he or she can connect to, and really on a much deeper level. And it really truly is out of respect. Just like when I was down in Texas, it wasn't a manipulative thing that I did. It was really an effort to respect that person and speak the way that they wanted to be spoken to. As a salesperson, the quickest preferences to see first when you first meet a client are their behaviors. And when I approach a client as a salesperson, I ask myself, how much energy do they have to give to expressiveness, to expressing themselves, and also to assert their opinion or listening to the opinions of others. Once I know this as a salesperson, then it's my job to adjust my energy to the energy of the client. And it really truly is about energy levels. And the way that I would like to highlight that, and oftentimes do this in my class, is to use an example from my experience with the sales team that I managed. As I mentioned, we would go spend a lot of time together during the day. I would coach and spend time with one person in a car all day long. I had a person on my team, I'll call her Mary, who always showed up with a lot of energy to express herself. She used to wear either all black or all white, and sometimes she would wear all red, large earrings, bright makeup, very loud, and my team would probably vote her as the funnest person on our team. Well, back then, my preference to express myself was much lower than it is today. So I would crawl into a car with Mary, and we would spend the entire day together, and I would constantly try to connect with her by matching her energy. Well, at the end of the day, I would walk through the front door. My wife would take a look at me, and she would immediately say, "You've spent the entire day with Mary, haven't you?" And the way she was able to quickly assess that was that I was physically tired at the end of the day, because it took a lot of work for me to ramp up my energy. What was really ironic is it wasn't until I became acquainted with the tool of Emergenetics that I realized that Mary went home and she opened her door and she probably flopped on her couch with as much exhaustion as I had, because she had to constantly ratchet down her energy to try to connect with her boss all day. So really the bottom line of this is that it's really important for us to respect the energy level of the person in front of us, so that we can earn that right to continue that sales discussion. The more difficult preference to detect in selling is the way a client thinks. So you may, as a salesperson, be speaking to someone with a large analytical preference, or maybe a big structural or social or conceptual preference, or a mix of those. What I'd like to do is use my wife, Kathy, as an example, and I did get her permission this morning. If someone were to come to our home, knock on our door, and the door opened, and there was my wife, and she invited him into our home, it would be that salesperson's job to quickly assess what part of the brain am I speaking to, so he or she could be successful in that sales call. And right away, if you were speaking to my wife in our home, you would be able to quickly realize that you're speaking to someone that's very detail-oriented. She speaks just a little bit slower than some people, not because of intellect at all, but because she's really trying to connect all the dots that's going on in her head. You realize very quickly that she's practical. You look around and see that everything is very organized. It's in its place. The picture frames on the wall are going straight up and down. All the rugs are lined up with the carpet, the edge of the carpet. So once that salesperson realized, okay, I'm speaking to a very structured brain, that person would then need to adjust their language to, out of respect, to speak the language of that person and earn their rights to have that sales discussion. So in this case, for a structural brain, my wife is very concerned about time. So immediately as a salesperson, I would want to acknowledge, thank you for your time, or I don't want to waste your time. And maybe even give her an agenda for the next 3 or 4 minutes about what I'd like to talk about. With most of my salespeople, we talk about how formality and training is sometimes not the best way to go, but for this brain it is. This brain likes formality. And this brain especially likes to have details to sift through later. So if my wife were interested, if she got some kind of pamphlet to read the details later, that would be totally in keeping with connecting with the structured brain. So that's an example. And in class, I would go through each of the 4 different thinking preferences and also the 3 behavioral preferences. And there's the green for you. I forgot to put that on. That's her green world. The biggest job for a high-performing consultative salesperson is to earn the right to dig deep for real needs within the client. So not only am I asking as a salesperson to use your time, but I'm also asking to earn the right to talk about more personal things, things that are oftentimes associated with emotions, but it really depends upon the preferences of the person you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone that has a big analytical preference, then using emotional language probably wouldn't earn you the right to connect to them. So the bottom line here is that the way to earn that right is to truly nail the preference that you're speaking to, and then be able to adjust the language to out of respect, to speak that language. I'd like to talk just a few minutes about how I engage the sales team. So this same tool that I'm teaching them is a great help for me to actually engage them in the classroom. And it's a little bit ironic. As a sales trainer, I think I've learned more about how to be a great salesperson and connect with a client more than I did out in the field. Because if you think about it, what I'm doing as a sales trainer is I'm selling to perhaps 15 different people. And I've got to be real cognizant of all of the different preferences in that room. And we talk about that as a class, you know, when you're selling to multiple people, and how do you do that. So in this case, I draw upon a lot of the great training that I got when I was certified at Emergenetics to engage a classroom of people. But what I'd like to do here today is to share with you some specific ways that I've engaged salespeople in sales training that has worked for us. So the first brain that I would zero in on is the analytical brain. So, and I have an advantage as a sales trainer. I have the profile information of every brain in that room. So I know when I look at that class that I know who has the analytical energy and who doesn't. So I would zero in on those folks, and those people are probably not only being kind of critical about why am I in this class, but thinking this seems like maybe a warm and fuzzy tool, and what's the credibility of this? And so what I will focus on right at the beginning of class is building the credibility of the Emergenetics tool, and it's so easy with the history and the science that's all behind that, but really building that foundation of the tool with looking at that and tying that in with sales research. I am also aware of the structured brains in the room, so not only do I make sure that I give them an agenda for the day and try to stick with that, But I also know it's important for them to make sure that all of this information I'm giving them is relevant to their sales world, and that I give them practical applications to help them to be a better salesperson. And so I've created and distributed relevant sales materials for them. And here is an example of something that I've created and I distribute during the training. And what this is kind of a cheat sheet that they can, I send it to them as a PDF and they put it on their iPads. So they can pull it up anytime, and if they know that they're going to be meeting with an analytical or a conceptual brain, then this gives them some words, some actions on how to assess who they're talking to, but even more importantly, how they can change their language, even their body language, to try to respectfully speak the language of their client. Also in that room are going to be some socially energized brains, and for those folks, as I start talking about emergenetics, they're probably thinking about pictures of people, faces in their mind. They're applying everything they're learning to real people. And so it's important for me with that brain to share real life stories, to get personal. And that's real easy for me to do with my 45% social brain. And it's also easy for me to draw upon the sales experiences I've had in the same environment that they're in. Finally, the conceptual brain is all about having fun. You know, they're thinking about, am I going to be sitting here all day? Is he going to talk the entire time? So it's important for me to make sure that I face them away from the window, face them toward me, and really try to get them moving around and having fun. One real critical thing that I do that really appeals to this brain, and I think it's real necessary in any sales training, is to apply what they're learning in class by doing role plays. And in this case, I know what their brains look like and what their preferences are, and I will purposely match them up with their nightmare sale. In other words, I'll pick someone that has a brain that looks exactly opposite of their brain, and that's who they will role play with. And what's great about that is we'll all sit around and watch the role play, and everybody learns from that interaction. And the debrief after is usually the highest learning period of the class, and it's also fun. And you know, with this environment of transparency that Emergenetics creates, it also kind of creates some safety to be able to do activities like that. I'm going to quickly just mention that you know, it's really hard to evaluate training and say how they've impacted bottom line results, but I have had a lot of information back from the field. In fact, I've run a contest where people will submit where they are applying skills that they learned in class and how it's had bottom line effect on the business. And one example is a salesperson. She said that she doesn't have a lot of analytical preference in her brain, but she quickly realized that the person sitting in front of her was kind of slapping the back of his hand on the other hand and talking about bottom line results, and he was very quick-paced. So she realized quickly that she was talking to the analytical brain, and she adjusted her language. She knew that her credibility meant everything, and she gathered data from his stores and presented it in a real fast-paced manner, bottom-line approach, and she was able to win a multi-million-dollar deal doing that. So there is bottom-line impact from using this as a tool. The last thing I'd like to and answers are some key takeaways from the experience I've had in the sales training, and particularly using Emergenetics as a tool for connecting. The first takeaway is Emergenetics is definitely a natural tool for salespeople. In my experience, salespeople instinctively know that it's critical to earn the right to interact with clients. It's critical to be able to connect and earn that right to build trust. And they also get the fact that building that trust is different for different people. And they want a context to be able to learn that and practice that. And the final thing is that they want a tool it's based on science. It's got a lot of credibility, but it's also easy to understand. They want something quick and easy. And I have found that Emergenetics has done just that, and fulfilled those needs for these salespeople. The second takeaway is salespeople are more likely to use Emergenetics in selling if they perceive a strong personal application in the training. So one of my goals is to get each person in that classroom to think about people in their personal life, family members, spouses, kids, and start thinking about how could I use this to better my communication and connection with people in my personal life. If I can get them there, I know that they will more likely apply that in their sales world and use this to impact success in selling. Finally, the takeaway is salespeople are more likely to use Emergenetics in selling if it is also adapted or adopted into the team and company culture. So beyond these core sales training classes, I have run a lot of workshops for sales teams with real specific objectives. Maybe it's improving that team connection, or maybe it's looking at some of the goals they have for the year that they're stuck on and looking at it in a Emergenetics perspective. I've also just recently finished a workshop with the marketing team, something I'm real passionate about. I'm kind of like the sales guy at headquarters, and this workshop was entitled Selling to the Sales Team. And so it was a way to help the marketing group better connect with the sales team. I would use examples of real life people in the sales team and ask, how do you connect to Daryl Taylor? And we would talk about it with an Emergenetics perspective, and that seemed to be quite valuable for them. And the final thing is that we are in the process of trying to post Emergenetics profiles of employees on our online communication and sales management platform called Salesforce.com. So when you get into that platform, you see a person's picture and information about them. What I'd like to do is put the Emergenetics profile on there. So at the end of the day, all of these things I just mentioned really build a culture using this tool of transparency and unity, and really being able to talk different languages with different people out of respect to get things done and to be successful. So that is the end of my presentation, Mark. I want to open up for questions and answers.
Wow. Thanks, Jerry. This was a great insight into just a much more personalized way of looking at sales and looking at connecting in both with your team from a sales perspective and from your client, your potential client. A couple of questions that came in that I thought was really interesting is you talked a bit about having a sales training team, and I wanted to know when you're working with building up that sales training team, what are the key things that you're looking for in terms of the team interaction in a way to build each of those individuals' capacities?
And when you say, are you talking about a sales team or a sales training team?
Well, a sales team. So, you know,
Okay.
if you're going into and training a sales team of folks who are going to go out in the field and sell, but each one of those is an individual within that. What do you train from that team perspective to help kind of build the overall capacity of the team and the individuals therein?
Great question. First of all, the thought that occurred to me is something that comes often in a classroom, and the question is, what is the perfect salesperson? What does their profile look? And I just wanted to reiterate that really it's all over the board. I've seen really good salespeople, and they've got all different types of preferences. But when I go into train a group of salespeople, and tell me if I'm answering what you're looking for, I'm really looking for a group of people that are very open to sharing themselves with the rest of the group and really conduct that way in their lives, because the more transparent that they can be, the more comfortable they are with themselves, it doesn't matter what their preferences are, then they will absolutely come across as being genuine and be able to build more trust more quickly with clients, because that really is at the core of a sales transaction. It's being able to have that trust so the client will be able to feel comfortable to share their needs and so forth. So I'm, bottom line, really looking for people to be transparent and be okay with who they are. And then I guess secondary to that is being engaged and excited about building the skill to connect with people that have incredibly different preferences than they do. Because if they can do that, then that opens up a multitude of different languages that they can speak and be successful in sales.
That's a great answer, and you definitely hit on what the question was intended for. Another interesting question that just came in was the idea of role-playing in different scenarios. So love the topic of using role-playing as a way to really engage the different kinds of learners that you have, the different kinds of salespeople who are in there. And from an Emergenetics perspective, one of the challenging things at times is to get that first third expressive. So for those who aren't as familiar with Emergenetics on the phone, those people who would fall into the more quiet end of the spectrum, who might prefer more one-on-one interactions. How do you facilitate role-playing in that way, Jerry? And how do you help take that into the marketplace where not all sales will be on a one-to-one level?
Well, the first part of that question, I am sensitive to that because I get all the data before I go into the class, and I know who has energy to express themselves and assert themselves and who doesn't. And so if someone is one-third expressive, one-third assertive, which means they have lesser energy for that, I often will contact them ahead of time and let them know this is what we typically do in class, and let them know that I typically will pair them up with someone that's just opposite of them, and just have a conversation with them and see if they're willing to stretch themselves and go into that. Sometimes I will not do it where the role play is in front of the rest of the class. I might split them up into three and have one observer observe the person role playing with someone that's playing their client, because I don't want to shut them down. I want them to have a good experience, but I do want them to stretch themselves as well. So the advantage I have is I know who is going to be in that class, and I can contact them ahead of time to prepare them and to make sure that it's structured in a way that they'll truly learn from the experience. And I couldn't remember the second part of your question.
No, I think that you touched on it, and it really did just go into what those different kinds of scenarios were that can engage folks who may fall outside of the traditional realm of a quote-unquote salesperson, and really knowing that all salespeople aren't going to be the same, and that's actually a good thing. One final question. I think we're just at about time, but one of the things that I think people always ask and always want to know in terms of selling is the idea of honing in on the kinds of words, the kinds of actions, the kinds of approaches that the person that they're trying to reach and trying to consult and sell with are facing, and how to modify their presentation or communication to that person. And I love what you said around just looking at the different ways that the brain and the behaviors are going to look at that. You also showed a little document that had some commonly used phrases. What are some other really nuts and bolts ways that you actualize that concept?
Besides passing out that piece of paper?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Well, in class itself, I think I mentioned what I try to do is I try to model what I'm teaching. So throughout the class, I will try to model the skills that I'm trying to get the salespeople to adopt themselves. And so I've become actually fairly good at getting outside of my own preferences and modeling some of these thinking preferences and also behavioral preferences. I also use a lot of stories, and I actually use people that they know, and I think that's really important, and I think that's what the incredible part of an Emergenetics workshop is, to be able to see an actual person you know and put that together with the information you're learning about preferences. And so I'll use stories about people within our company, and it'll be fun, and it'll be really highlighting their preferences and how would you approach that person if you were selling to them, and how wouldn't you approach them. So try to keep it very fun and light and very real, using a lot of real people. But then, for the structured brain, this document is pretty important to leave with.
That's a great example, Jerry, and I think connecting it in with people that others may know is a really good way to get that into their heads and into what they can do. Well, we are at time. Jerry, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent and really eye-opening.
I'm honored. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.